Yes, pass rush is overrated. There's a lot of evidence to back it up. And if you don't want to take my word for it, how about I instead just show you that evidence and let you make the decision for yourself? So let's look at this first chart. This is where the average Super Bowl winning team ranks in each positional category according to PFF. So basically, the way to think about it, the average Super Bowl winning team has the 5th best receiving core and the 6th best quarterback. Down the line, you have coverage, then offensive line, running back, run defense, and finally pass rush. Now, this is the amount of times a not top 15 team made the Super Bowl in the past 10 years. There's never been a wide receiving core that didn't rank top 15 that made the Super Bowl. There's been one quarterback, that was Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos, who did go on to win the Super Bowl. 5 coverage units, 8 offensive line units, 7 running back rooms, 6 run defenses, and 10 pass rushes, meaning half of the teams to make the Super Bowl in the past 10 years had a bottom 17 pass rush. These are the amount of times a top 5 ranking unit made it in each of these positional categories. So 13 times a top 5 receiving core made the Super Bowl, 13 for quarterback, 12 for coverage, and then again, a big drop off. Pass rush a little bit higher than offensive line, running back, or run defense here, so that's a little bit fascinating, but as a whole, still nowhere near coverage, quarterback, or wide receiver. This next chart is you look at the average top 5 group in each of these positional categories and then the average bottom 5 and just see what the difference is in terms of points per drive between those on average. So wide receiver, you'll see about a 0.67 points per drive difference. Quarterback 0.85, coverage 0.59. O-line here is at 0.37, run defense 0.25, and pass rush 0.2. So it all matters, but obviously, according to this, coverage, quarterback, and wide receiver are continuously the 3 most important factors here. Even if you want to combine run defense and pass rush together, it's still looking at less on average than just coverage as a whole. Coverage seems to matter more in a football game than run defense and pass rush together. If you want to look at team records here, a bottom 5 pass rushes team's record, it's lower, 171 and 234. Worth mentioning, there's a couple of ties there, but I included ties as, if there's 2 ties, it's 1 win and 1 loss, meaning their win percentage is 0.422. But for bottom 5 receivers, it drops all the way to 0.335. Clearly, you'd rather have a great receiving core than a great pass rush, I think. So these are the several possibilities of things I can come up with for why all this data exists in a certain way. There's several different possibilities from what we've gathered with the data. Number 1 is that 10 years of data isn't enough, which I think it is. To me, this feels like a big enough sample size. You could argue it isn't, but I don't know. I think 32 teams over a 10-year sample size feels pretty significant enough to me. Number 2 is that what I think is the case, which is pass rushers are overrated. And then number 3 is that PFF sucks, because I used all of this using PFF's grades. Maybe you just think PFF is horrible at grading, in which case you could certainly make the argument that no, it's not that pass rush is overrated. PFF is just really bad at grading. So is that the case? Well, they're certainly not perfect, right? I mean, they did grade Myles Garrett with a 92.7 grade and TJ Watt with just a 90.6 grade. So they're in the same ballpark, but they graded Garrett ahead of Watt. I would have had Watt ahead of Garrett personally. I get their logic behind it, but it's not what I would have done. I think that TJ Watt's the best edge rusher in football. So that's just the way I view it. So they're not perfect. There's no denying that. Although I want to be clear, for this data to be wrong, what it would mean is that it's not just that they're not perfect, but that they're significantly off to the point where we shouldn't look at the data. And I just don't really think that's the case from looking at it myself. For example, these are the top 5 teams that you have on this season. You have the Rams, Packers, 49ers, Steelers, and Eagles as the top 5 edge rush groupings, or just pass rush groupings in general, not just edge rushers, but all pass rushers. That feels right to me. Nothing really jumps out at me as clearly wrong. Meanwhile, for the bottom 5, again, Giants, Lions, Seahawks, Broncos, and Falcons, again, checks out to me. That feels about right. Again, this is a small sample size. We're only looking at 1 year, but even going back and I looked at further years, it still feels right to me. Maybe you'll just, again, if you disagree and think, no, the Lions pass rush was great, well, then maybe you can throw out the data to me, this feels like it's more right than wrong. Now, one thing I should mention that you could argue goes against my point, but again, I'm not just going to bring up the stuff that supports my argument, I'll bring it all up, is that pressures in sacks do match up with good defenses. They do correlate pretty heavily to having a good defense. But the reason why I'm not willing to say, well, that just means that pass rush matters more than PFF grades would indicate is simply because there's plenty of ways you can get a pressure and plenty of ways you can get a sack. If you get a pressure 6 seconds into a play, it still counts as a pressure in the stat sheet. So that's why I'm kind of less likely to use a stat like that and more likely to use a grade, which kind of factors in the whole play and how quick you're getting to pressure and how long did the quarterback hold on to the football and all of that stuff. That's why I believe that. So why do we believe pass rush matters more then? If there is this data to suggest the other stuff, and maybe people will bring up good counters that I haven't thought of yet, that's certainly possible. But let's say that that doesn't happen, and let's just say that there is this data. Why do we believe the opposite? Well, I think there is a couple of reasons. Like, for one thing, it's totally, I would say probable that pass rush used to matter more. I think going back to in the day where, guys could actually touch the quarterback without getting a flag, and you could actually rough the quarterback up and hit them, and quarterbacks were getting rid of the football quickly, and, defenders were able to basically just tackle the wide receivers. Pass rush probably mattered more because it took longer for plays to develop, and also you don't have to risk getting flags and stuff for touching the quarterback. I think it's totally reasonable to suggest that the sport has changed, and in doing so, certain positions matter more than they used to. Similar to basketball, where everyone wants to shoot threes now, whereas it used to be, it was like whoever had the best center was going to win. This stuff happens in sports. I also think that every time I think about this argument, I think about the Ja'Marr Chase photo, the Ja'Marr Chase Penei Sewell photo, and I'll show it. This is what I mean, and I have to be honest here, this is objectively a very funny meme. I think that's the first thing, is this is very funny. So this was created by somebody, I don't know who, but I've seen it all around Twitter. I think I've seen it on Reddit as well. It was created by a Bengals fan explaining why they wanted Penei Sewell. Option A is Joe Burrow has time to throw, and regardless of who he's throwing to, he can throw it and hit somebody because he has enough time to make the throw. Whereas option B means that if just anybody is in front, you're going to get pressure before Joe Burrow has time to throw the ball and hit Ja'Marr Chase. But this just isn't how I view football, at least not in the year 2022. The reality is, basically every single sack happens because a first read isn't open. The reality is, a sack that happens 3 seconds into a play is absurdly quick. That's like the quickest sacks you'll see all year. Basically, every quarterback gets rid of the football on average less than 3 seconds into a play, which means that, basically for you to get a sack, there has to be some element of coverage. A way to think about this is you're not talking about, do you want to have a great pass rusher versus no pass rusher? You're talking about, do you want to have a great pass rusher versus a replacement level pass rusher? Well, replacement level pass rushers are pretty good. They're still going to get some pressure in around the same amount of time that a great pass rusher would. Not as frequently and not as quick, but they still will get some pressure. I think many people view this as, well, if you have 10 seconds to make a throw, well, you're going to find somebody that's open eventually. That's true, but you never have 10 seconds to make a throw. That just doesn't exist. You typically, with good offensive line play versus bad offensive line play, or good defensive line play versus bad defensive line play, it's only going to get you about an extra second. So I think when you put that into perspective, in an extra second, we're talking the extremes from the good to the bad. Meanwhile, the difference between having a Ja'Marr Chase is Ja'Marr Chase legitimately couldn't get open in 1 second, or at least be in position where he will get open and can get rid of the football in the first second of a play, whereas a bad receiver, a replacement level receiver, might just not get open throughout the play altogether. So that's the difference between those two, and why the data suggests that having a good receiver matters more than having a good pass rusher. That's how I view it. You can disagree if you want to. There are some legitimate issues with this line of thinking. One thing that jumps out right away is pass rush is very predictable. A good pass rusher is going to be good. TJ Watt's almost certainly going to be good next year. Whereas with cornerbacks and with coverage in general, it's a lot less predictable. A lot of times with coverage, it varies year in and year out. A good coverage unit like Washington's last year now doesn't play well this year. And it's if anything, they kind of upgraded in that category. They brought in a good corner and somehow got worse. It's unpredictable, whereas pass rush is much more predictable, which makes team building a lot easier. Another issue is offensive line can't prevent injuries. You know, quarterback doesn't get hit as much. He's not going to get injured as much. Although, also worth mentioning, a good receiving core can also prevent injuries because your quarterback gets rid of the football quicker. So it does work both ways. And I don't know, I haven't ran any data on what actually prevents more injuries, but that's another fascinating situation. But yeah, listen, this is consistently one of my hottest takes I have, but I am determined to get my point across. Even if you don't agree with it, get people to understand it, because I think that, you know, I made one video right when TJ Watt got signed, and I think I just didn't make it very well. I didn't make my point very well, so I'm hopeful that this video will just get you to understand my point a little bit better. Maybe it won't. Maybe everyone will hate this one too, but we'll have to wait and see. At least now I feel like I've done a better job at explaining my point. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.